Should you train differently if you're trying to bulk versus trying to cut? Watch this.
Our next caller is Richard from California.
What's up, Richard? How can we help you?
Hey guys, good to see you. So my question is, I'm coming off of a bulk since August, and I've been switching back and forth, some bulks, some mini cuts. But as I go into the new year, I'm going to start a cut, and what I've noticed is that during cut phases, because I'm eating less, it's hard to maintain strength, and I don't want to lose all the muscle. So my question is in regards to rep ranges. I've been following your program, the anabolic and performance, and I've been trying to do, like the 5x5s and trying to do strength training. But I'm wondering about when I go into a cut, is it better to do like lower weights with more reps, or try to maintain the strength so I don't lose that much muscle? So that's my question.
Yes.
What's the optimal range?
Yes to both. Yeah, so the same rules apply that would apply to when you're in a surplus, is that you want to cycle through and phase your workouts, because your body does get adapted to a specific rep range, and it stops becoming or it can start to stop becoming an effective muscle building signal. So in other words, 3 weeks of 5 reps, follow that up with 3 weeks of 10 reps. Of course, adjust the weight accordingly, right? And then follow that up with 3 weeks of 15 reps, and then go back to the lower reps. So you want to cycle through, and it doesn't matter whether you're cutting or bulking. Now, the only caveat I'll give you is that you really have to deal with the psychological aspect of cutting. You are not going to be able to lift as heavy, even if you don't lose any muscle, just because you have less energy, okay? Because I'll be weaker when I go on a low-calorie diet before I ever lose any muscle at all, just because don't have the same capacity with energy. So keep that in mind. Don't pay attention so much to the weight that you're lifting, because it's probably going to go down. But that's not necessary. It's somewhat expected. Somewhat expected.
So the part that you touched on with the psychological part, that to me this is where the answer lies for the individual. Because yes, the truth is both have value. The idea is to always be phasing out of reps no matter where you're at in your diet cycle or whatever like that. But I do encourage people to, hey, run MAPS Anabolic phase 1 and run it one time through with a bulk, run it another time through a cut, do the same thing in phase 3, try both ways. And the thing that I want you to pay attention to more than anything else is psychologically what happens to you. Because when you identify as the strong guy and you really like pushing weight, and you're in a cut and you're in a phase where you have to lift heavy, sometimes that will fuck people up psychologically. And then they end up doing stupid shit where they load the bar too much, they end up hurting themselves, or they screw up on their diet because they get frustrated because they're not seeing the strength gains anymore, or they're seeing it go down. So how you see yourself react psychologically, I think, is the answer to how you should run during that. Personally, okay, what I have found is when I am especially when I was competing and I was in a hard cut for a long time, it is inevitable. I almost feel like I'm getting weaker week over week, and that could really kind of fuck with you mentally, to getting weaker and weaker. So that is when I tend to taper off of doing a lot of my big lifts where I'm trying to push heavy weight, and I focus more on the hypertrophy and the pump and slowing down the tempo. And so I love to start playing with things like that where the weight doesn't matter as much. Like if all of a sudden you guys hear us talk about things like, when's the last time you did like a 6-second negative, or, when have you done like a pause squat, or you do like these isometric type of exercise in there. I like to start to incorporate stuff like that in a cut, because then it takes me away from like thinking about, man, last week when I was bench pressing, I was doing 225 and now I can only do 180. Like that messes with my head. So I try and switch my programming up to things that are less focused on weight, but still are sending a novel stimulus to my body. So it's sending a signal that my body wants to build muscle, even though I know it's not going to, because I'm reducing calories. And really, there's no science to support why I do that or why it's better, other than the psychological game that I'm playing with myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess what I'm hearing is that you want to maintain a novelty through the cut, so that the body is still responding to preserving the muscle, and maybe not so much like, oh, I gotta PR during a cut. I mean, if you can maintain it but not hurt yourself, that's great. But I think most important from what I'm hearing is that just keep it novel throughout that cutting process.
Correct.
Yeah.
What builds muscle is best is also what preserves muscle best. Now, here's one other thing that I want to comment on with the mental piece. People often look at the physiological aspects, what's going to build, what's going to stimulate the most, but I think you need to consider the mental piece more than anything. Because if you stop a cut or if you stop your workout or whatever, it's almost always due to something mentally, lose motivation, lose commitment. Oh, I don't know if I feel good doing this, or I think I can lift heavier. Why can't I lift as much? So here's another tip. I like to do a lot of body weight type exercises when I'm cutting. And here's why. When I do pull-ups, if I lose 5 pounds on the scale, I'm lifting less weight when I do a pull-up. And so I notice that I feel like I get to do the same amount of reps. So it doesn't mess with me as much, right? I like to do body weight dips when I'm in a cut, and I'll use weight around my waist. And it's like, wow, I can lift. I'm on a cut and I'm lifting a heavier dumbbell than I did before. Well, yeah, I'm 10 pounds lighter too, right? So you got to, and I know talking about it sounds silly, but put yourself in that position and you know what that feels like. So that's the most important thing to consider, I would say. But yeah, what builds muscle the best is what also preserves muscle the best. So consider that.
Great. All right. Thanks, guys.
You got it, man. Thanks, Richard. Yeah, how long did it take you guys as trainers to realize that the mental piece is the number one most important thing to focus on with your clients?
It's huge, and to kind of reiterate, like that being something I had to consider a lot when you're going through a cut was like, first of all, you're gonna lift less, you're gonna feel weak, it's not gonna be the same experience, I think, and so going through, I think, and revisiting it with a different mentality towards it was huge for me. So it was like, not necessarily avoiding it, because also too, that was one of the best ways for me to preserve muscle, which was like, I used to take it all on at once. So being an athlete, like if I'm in a cut, I wanted to do the most extreme, like cardiovascular, like crazy circuit, or like whatever I could do to like kind of punish my way to get there. And so, but I would lose muscle, as I would go through that cutting process and not get to that desired outcome. And so, to train my mind to stay in those same lifts, but realize I'm going to be weaker in those lifts was part of the training.
I mean, I think so much of this lifelong fitness game that we play, as far as like, so much of it's psychological.
It's 95% of it.
So I mean, that's why too, I think I get really frustrated sometimes when we had the last caller with like the coach, where we're like battling like over like just stupid, like splitting hair difference type of arguments, when it's like really, the big argument is like figuring out how this person ticks and what motivates them and what keeps them going and what discourages them and why do they quit normally, and like piecing that all together. And I think as an individual who's listening, like that's trying to figure this out, like that you have to always be factoring that in too. Yep. It's not just, oh, this is the best exercise for this, or this study says that when you're in a cut, you do this and this response. It's like, well, wait a second. Like that only applies if you're perfect about following everything to a T, which I've yet to meet anybody who's like that. Yeah, most people, most people are inconsistent. Most people fall off. Most people get discouraged. And so it's like, you got to factor all those things in when you make decisions like this. And so I just learned over time that, man, when I was cutting, because I have this issue with building muscle, and I used to think that my muscle would fall off my body. Think about a guy who works so hard to build muscle, and then he goes in a cut, and then he's seeing his bench press go down every single week. Like that would fuck with me, and then I would fall off the diet. I go right back to
oh crap, gotta get back in a bulk.
Yeah, I go right back in a bulk because of that. Yep. So even if that was the best thing for me to do, that bench press, because I've learned that lesson so many times, I know, like, you know what, this is a good time for me to do push-ups, or isometrics, or do things that like I don't have like this arbitrary like number that I know is like, oh, I'm strong when I bench press this. Well, I don't have that for body weight push-ups or suspension trainer push-ups or like weird exercises.
You know what else I used to do to and I do this even now to this day to help with the psychological piece. When I'm cutting, this is when I'm more likely to work out in a tank top, because I can see the definition, so I don't worry so much about the weight. When I'm bulking, sweater, long sleeve shirt, whatever, because I don't care. It's just about how much weight I can lift. Yeah. And it was just something I figured out years ago. It's like, well, okay, if I can see the definition, I'm not as disappointed that
just a sweater wife beater.
Yes, that's both. Best of both worlds.
I used to use creatine like this. So this was like
creatine in the cut to help. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would actually not use creatine consistently, and I'd save it for the cuts for a show, and I would then start to do it. So I'd get a little bit of the loading of the water in my muscles, and so I'd get a little fuller look and do the same thing.
Or you could be like me and just always use creatine because who cares? Maximize it all,